It's my pleasure to introduce Scott. Scott Mendel is a parent of a daughter with developmental disabilities who lives in Misericordia. He's a retired partner of the international law firm K&L Gates. At K&L Gates, Scott concentrated his practice in complex antitrust litigation, including class actions, and antitrust aspects of mergers, acquisitions, and joint ventures, and counseling clients on antitrust compliance with respect to pricing, distribution, and other matters. He also counseled the firm's healthcare clients on antitrust matters. During his 40 years of practice, Scott has been involved in a number of pro bono matters involving individuals with disabilities, indigent clients, and incarcerated individuals. Scott is currently the board chairman of Together for Choice. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Dana, thanks for having me this evening.
It's wonderful. Just a minute on the format tonight. We'll start off with question and answers. And I get to ask the questions and Scott gets to answer them. And then we'll have time for questions that you place in the chat box or that come up. So let's go ahead and get started. I guess let's begin with Together for Choice. What is it? And how does the organization serve IDD individuals?
Sure. Together for Choice is a national disabilities advocacy organization. We're about 6 years old. And as our name implies, our mission is to ensure that the individual and the individual's family have a wide array of residential and vocational services to choose from, and that the choice is that of the individual and the individual's family, not some government bureaucrat. We recognize that the disabilities community is very diverse. There's a wide range of needs and preferences. And therefore, we believe that there needs to be a wide variety of settings, both residentially and vocationally, that are adequately funded by the government so that individuals can choose the setting and the services that best meet their needs and preferences.
All right. You said the mission is advocacy. Can you talk a little bit about that work and how you go about it?
Sure. And we do advocacy work at all levels of government, the federal government, certainly, but also at the state and local level. And it takes a variety of forms. We certainly keep a watch on proposed legislation in Congress. We advocate regarding regulations, principally with CMS, but sometimes with the Department of Labor, sometimes with the Department of Justice. And then at the state level, similarly, we keep a watch on legislation there that might affect our membership. And just one example of a regulation we've been deeply involved in that I think you probably want to talk a bit more about this evening is the Home and Community-Based Services Rule, which was adopted by CMS in 2014. And we've been advocating with respect to that rule because it's a rule that is a federal rule, but it is enforced at the state level. And so we do advocacy work regarding what's called the settings rule, both at the federal level and then at the state level as well.
So does this have to do with the whole notion that big settings are bad and small settings are good?
That is certainly a prevailing point of view among other disability advocacy groups and among certain folks in government. And so, yes, we are one of the reasons why Together for Choice was formed was to fight against that notion. In our view, Small can be good, big can be good, small can be bad, big can be bad. And there's been, we all are aware, because it gets a lot of press coverage, when there are abuse and neglect situations in larger congregate settings. And those are horrible. The truth is, the same goes on in smaller settings as well. It is not the size of setting that is a cause or a reason for abuse and neglect or deficient services. It has to do, obviously, funding is a huge issue. It has to do with who are running these settings and the employees there, and having appropriate government oversight. And so, and a lot of what we do in order to explain to our government folks that big can be good and is good, is we bring to them families who have had family members live in smaller settings, not do well in those settings, move them to a farmstead or an intentional community or campus setting where they have thrived because of their specific needs and preferences. And we have found that to be very effective. Folks that have an open mind understand that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution here, both on the residential side of things or on the vocational side of things. And that's really what we push. It is simply not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Well, you would think that that would totally resonate with the whole concept of person-centered thinking. Where does that, that come off the rails?
It's very interesting. I guess what I like to say is some of the folks, and again, I don't want to be critical. There's a lot of really good folks in government and really good advocates as well. But there are folks who are ideologically driven, and it comes down to, yes, we believe in choice and person-centered planning as long as you choose the right thing. If you choose the wrong thing, then you have forfeited your right to choice, essentially. And the other thing that we are advocating on and feel very important is the notion that Together for Choice serves anybody with disabilities, but we really focus on the intellectual disability community. And even there, I would say our primary focus is on those with significant intellectual disabilities. And just to give you an example, my daughter, Sarah, is 40 years old. But intellectually, she's 3 or 4 years old. She can't read or write or do basic math. I mean, she's a wonderful person, but she's got limitations, and those limitations mean that she can't on her own make some very important decisions about her life. My wife and I are her guardian. We help her make those decisions, and we do so in a way we think are in her best interests. But I'm sure you're aware and have heard that there are some advocacy groups that say there shouldn't be guardianship, that parents don't know what's best for their child. They're making decisions on what's best for them, not for their child. And they want to get rid of guardianship or limit it substantially. And that's another area that we work in to advocate for the fact that there are some folks, my daughter among them, that really need a guardian to make these important decisions, with my daughter, as opposed to, having her make those on her own.
I mean, are they suggesting the alternative is that the state makes all those decisions?
Well, there's a lot of talk about facilitated decision-making, where somebody, it could be an employee of the state, it could be some other third party, would facilitate my daughter making that decision. But who knows the individual best? in my view, in terms of my daughter, my wife and I know her best. And bringing in somebody else to do this, let's say they have a caseload of 100 folks or 150 folks, they're not going to know Sarah like we know Sarah. We have a one-person caseload. That's Sarah. And our lives are devoted to her. And we know her likes and her preferences and her needs. And we are best positioned to make those decisions for her. And we feel that way about parents, siblings, and other family members, that their right to be able to make decisions for their loved one needs to be protected.
Very interesting. Tell me a little bit about some of these communities that you see as really doing it right. It sounds like you've come across a lot. I don't know. I'm just guessing maybe Misericordia is one of them.
Yes, I mean, Misericordia is an organization now that's 50 years old in terms of its servicing of individuals with disabilities. It started back in 1969. It's got a nationwide reputation. It serves over 600 men and women. It has a waiting list that's hundreds long to get into Misericordia, which speaks to the quality of services that it provides. And my daughter has lived there now over 30 years. She lives in a home that's on the campus. Misericordia operates a campus which has intermediate care facilities on the campus, individual homes that are classified as intermediate care facilities. It's also has a skilled nursing facility on the campus, and it has a day program on the campus. And then it also has 15 homes in neighborhoods around the campus that are home and community-based settings. So it has what we call a full continuum of care. And individuals can move from one setting to another as their needs change and their preferences change. And this becomes so important today because of the great care that folks are receiving, they're living longer than ever before. And as we know, especially folks, for example, with Down syndrome, they start having symptoms of aging earlier than the general population. And so a person with Down syndrome may be living in a home in the neighborhood and doing just fine. But when they get into their 40s or 50s, there may start to be a decline where they need more intensive services, and they can be brought back to a home on the campus and serve there. So it's a great place because it has everything that somebody needs for a lifetime of their care.
Sounds good. How about some other examples in your?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to point out ones over others. There, obviously there are many folks who are members of Together for Choice Opportunity Village in Las Vegas, out in sort of more in your neck of the woods. Is a great organization. It started primarily as providing vocational services to folks, and it's now expanded into residential services. The Arc of Jacksonville in Florida, another member of Together for Choice, has some wonderful services. Marbridge down in Texas, Annandale Village outside of Atlanta. And I'm not, obviously I don't want to go through a list of everybody, so I'm not, anybody who's listening who I have not mentioned, please don't be offended. But there are many great organizations. Pathfinder Village in New York, the executive director is a member of our board. And it's a wide variety of settings. Some are intermediate care facilities, some are home and community-based settings, some are campus settings, some are farmsteads, but that's the whole point, is that we need a wide range of settings, and we support a wide range of settings. And we are not opposed to people living in small homes in neighborhoods. That's great for those for whom that really works. And we like those, and we support more funding for them, and we support ending waiting lists for them. But we also support other kinds of settings, farmsteads, intentional communities, campus settings, intermediate care facilities, because those meet needs for certain folks as well.
Fantastic. When you think back on this 6 years, I mean, what do you think the most significant change you've been able to accomplish, with this advocacy?
What really brought Together for Choice together, so to speak, what caused us to form, was the CMS's adoption of this home and community-based services rule. And it caused a realization among some service providers and some families and some individuals that, boy, the movement to close larger facilities and move everybody into small homes and community has really apparently gotten some leverage in DC, and now we're facing a rule that could be extremely difficult to deal with. And so we also saw an opportunity when a new administration came in 2017, that one of the platforms of that new administration was less regulation, less government involvement in people's lives, deferring things more to the states. And so we thought, okay, the settings rule is sort of prototypical, the kind of rule that more conservative folks, more folks who are members of the Republican Party might see as, yeah, this is overstepping where government should be. So we felt this was a good opportunity to go to CMS, sit down with them and say, hey, this rule is really problematic because it limits choice. It limits the kinds of settings that qualify for federal Medicaid waiver funding. And it really needs to be amended. And we marked up the rule and said, these are the things we think should change. We kept in as much of it as we could and only, suggested changes to as little of it as we thought was necessary. And we said, if you didn't want to change the rule, at least change your guidance, because there was guidance under the rule that said that farmsteads, intentional communities, campus settings were presumptively segregating and had to go through this heightened scrutiny process that's set forth in the rule. And we said, that's not right. You can't just presume that a setting, just because it's a farmstead or an intentional community or a campus setting, is segregating. They're not all segregating. There are many that are not. And we use Misericordia and other places as examples. And it took a lot of advocacy. And ultimately, CMS decided they didn't want to amend the rule, because that's a whole process they have to go through, which they had just gone through to enact the rule to begin with. But they did issue new guidance, and they revoked the 2014 guidance that was issued along with the rule, and issued new guidance in March of 2019, which said that the farmsteads, intentional communities, and campus settings are no longer presumptively segregating and no longer must always go through the heightened scrutiny process. You have to evaluate them individually, and you have to look at the individuals living in these settings and whether they're living the lives they're choosing to live. So you can't assess a setting by saying, well, how many times does somebody go off the campus and receive services off the campus or engage in activities off the campus? The question is that person getting the services and the community engagement they want? That might be once a week, it might be 5 times a week. It depends on the individual. Is the individual living the life they choose? And that's a lot of what that new guidance says. And so, and I don't want TFC to take full credit for it. There were other people advocating for it as well. but I think we were instrumental in getting that change.
Well, I mean, thank you for that effort. I mean, there's many of us who are parents that have, been happy to see some state institutions close, and it was quite concerning that same brush might be painted, a little too widely. So thank you for that advocacy. Well, what do people, what advice would you give them? How can we all be better advocates? I mean, should we join Together for Choice? What should people do if, to be good advocates for individuals in this population?
Well, obviously, we'd love everybody to join Together for Choice, but more generally, what we found that really works is to engage with your government representatives, both at the local, state, and federal level, and get to know them and get them to know you, and have them come to your place, your residential setting where your child lives, or the vocational setting where your child spends their days. Have them see what the good work that's being done. And that really opens their eyes. What you have to realize is members of Congress and even members of state legislatures, they have tons of stuff on their plate. This is one issue out of thousands that they deal with. You can't expect them to be expert in it. You're the expert in it. And they're willing to be taught. Most of them are really willing to be taught. And so every opportunity you have, engage them. And it's best to do that before you need them. So that when you do need them, you call them up and say, hey, there's this bill in Congress that could really be a problem for my child. They already know you. And they already know your situation. And then they're oftentimes very willing to help. And so it's work, it's effort, and we all have busy lives, especially when we have a family member with special needs. That takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy. But it's really an effort that is very worthwhile making, because it can really, really make a difference. Otherwise, they're just hearing the voices of some of these national disability organizations that are really advocating for folks that are higher functioning than my daughter, for example, and are proposing solutions that are great for the folks they're advocating for, but would not work for my daughter. And our government officials need to hear another voice, need to hear multiple other voices, so that they realize that the diversity of the community that we're a member of.
That's very good. I think this probably be a really good point to thank you, and transition back to Brittany, and we'll see what kind of questions are out there.
Sure, yeah. So we do have a couple questions that have come in already, but if you haven't done so already, again, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions that you have, and we'll go ahead and answer them. So we do have a question that came in through the chat. I think this is a good question for both of you, since you're both in different locations. So where is a good place to learn about the different housing options for those with IDD or physical disabilities that are more independent in nature?
That's a great question, actually very timely as far as Together for Choice is concerned. Our national coordinator, Ashley Kim Weiss, actually just put together, and it's on our website, an extensive list of residential facilities throughout the country. It goes state by state, and it's by no means complete. and we're working. It's a living document, and we're working to add on. In fact, we invite people to look at that list, tell us what places we're missing that they know about, and send that, email us with those names. But that's a great place for folks to start. It doesn't have a ton of information about each place. It just tells you where it's located. It gives you the website, so you can go check it out yourself. We wanted to be very careful that we don't, populate it with information that may not be accurate or maybe more opinion as opposed to fact. And so we don't go into a lot of detail about each site, but at least it's a place to start. And then you can go to the website and that'll tell you the population that they serve and the kind of services they offer and that sort of thing.
That sounds really good. And in fact, that'd be quite useful because I find particularly for some of these intentional communities, there isn't really a place to find out about them other than oftentimes word of mouth. As I think of the question, and I heard pretty high functioning folks who want a more independent environment. And so typically service model wise, a lot of folks might, get services to be more independent, living at home or getting their own place, apartment or something like that in the community and get what's called independent living support or maybe supported living services. You almost have to, explore that, locally and try and identify. Oftentimes people get assessments to start so that they can maybe better understand what kind of support the individual needs to do what he or she wants to do, what their goal is. And I always suggest trying to, get in touch with a independent living or supported living service provider and maybe, ask them for some help understanding, options. Here locally, there's organizations like Housing Choices and Parents Helping Parents that often have resources that might be useful for that kind of a question.
Great. And we do have another question in the Q&A. And again, if you haven't already asked those questions, you can use either the Q&A feature or the chat. The chat will come to the panelists. So again, for both of you, how do you work to promote informed choice and advocate for thoughtfully supported exposure to multiple options for consideration by the person with a disability?
Well, I guess there are a couple of things I would say. One is obviously it's very important if you're a parent or you're a sibling and you're trying to find an appropriate residential setting or vocational setting for your family member. The burden largely falls on you to look at locally as to what are those resources that are available in your area. Often there are state agencies that can help you. You want to be a little careful because again, you'll find that some of these folks do have some biases and may show you only certain types of settings and not show you others. So, one of the things we advocate for is to make sure that these agencies that are there to help people find an appropriate setting do make sure that they're providing all the options that are available so that the person can make an informed choice. But I think it's fair to say, at least from my perspective, the burden largely falls on the individual and the family to, do all the research that can be done to find all the various options that might be available to you.
Yeah, I agree with Scott. The burden unfortunately falls way too much on the family member. There are some resources. I mean, I mentioned Parents Helping Parents, or somebody's Housing Choices, or at the regional center, I always, send people to try and get help through their service coordinator. And ideally, their own research will lead them to service providers and other sources of information that will be useful. When it comes to living outside of the family home, there's really not a whole lot of different models. And on the one end of the spectrum, I think Scott, did a great job of articulating these intentional communities. They can take a lot of different, sizes and shapes, and then there are residential care homes. And then basically folks have their own apartment and get some level of support. And then there's the family home. So the residential models are fairly limited. You can always come up with, variations of each. But I encourage people to go out and learn about each of those, and if possible, get out to see them, go visit, go see what they're like. I think there's no shortcut, to seeing firsthand and meeting people and seeing how they live in their home and their vocational program or day program. And of course, day programs are another whole area where, there's a lot of different sizes and shapes, and, a lot kind of comes back to, what that family member, wants and would be interested in. And sometimes that's not always obvious. Back
Great.
to you, Brittany.
Great, thank you both. Scott, this might be more directed towards you. Does the newer CMS guidance apply at the state level? How would I obtain the information in written form? And regarding local government, where should I begin? City council, planning and zoning, etc.
Yes, so the settings rule and the guidance under it do absolutely apply to the states. I mean, it's a feature of our Medicaid system, which is a federal and state shared program. The feds fund part of it, states fund part of it. The percentage of the sharing varies by state depending on the wealth of the state. But as a result, you have both federal rules that apply and state rules that apply. And the settings rule is a rule at the federal level that requires the states to actually enforce the rule in the state. And so, I mentioned the modification to the guidance that we were able to get in 2019. Then our next step after that was to make sure that the states were aware of the new guidance, even though it was sent to all the states by CMS. There were still state regulators that were not aware of it, and that the states were properly applying the new guidance. And so we had a situation just recently, for example, in Oklahoma. There was an organization called A New Leaf in Oklahoma that was opening some new residential settings. It wanted the state to approve it for its Medicaid programs, waiver program. And Oklahoma kept turning it down. And the reasons it gave were under the old guidance. And we got involved to help. We had to go back to CMS and say, can you please talk to the folks in Oklahoma and explain to them your new guidance? And when CMS did that, Oklahoma said, oh, sorry, you're now approved. So it's, it sort of boggles the mind. You think you shouldn't have to do that, but you do. And we've been doing this in a number of other states too, where states have been reluctant or just uninformed about, applying the new guidance, which, as I said, opens up the opportunity for more types of settings to qualify for Medicaid waiver funding.
And just to kind of understand the order of magnitude, here in California, the regional center, is funded by the state, and all of the money that is funded, all is waiver money, and about something approximating 50 cents of every dollar comes from the federal government. So that 50 cents shows up in Sacramento, they tack another 50 cents on, and then they pass it on to the regional center, and they pay service providers for the services that you get. So you can imagine when the federal government says, well, if you don't adhere to this waiver, that setting will not get federal dollars. Well, that was 50 cents on the dollar. So that was a lot of leverage. And so, so many states had, absolutely, no choice, and may not have been that inclined to, to bucket anyways. So
yeah, and one of the problems, if I can add to that, Dana, that we're seeing in some states, because of the burden is imposed on the states to actually go to each one of the settings, both residential and vocational in the state, that get Medicaid waiver funding, and make sure they qualify and meet the requirements of the settings rule. In a state like Illinois, and I'm sure a state like California, that's a huge burden because there's thousands of these settings. And so the states understandably want to sort of, well, let's see if we can make this simpler. And the way, for example, Illinois wants to make it simpler is they have a rule that says, well, we're only going to have small homes in neighborhoods qualify for waiver funding. Even though we know we can do more, we don't want to, because then we have to worry about, are these larger settings, these different kinds of settings, do they meet all the requirements? Whereas the small homes in the community, we don't have to worry about, we know they do. And, I understand the urge to do that. If you're a government employee and you're just trying to make life a little bit easier for you. The problem, of course, is that actually hurts some of the folks you're trying to serve. And so that's the battle that we fight, not just in Illinois, but in Pennsylvania and in other states that are sort of taking that approach.
Okay, great. Let's see here. This could be for either or both. What is your experience with supportive housing models for individuals as subsidized by HUD and other entities?
Yeah, Dana, I think I'll defer that to you. I'm not sure I have really much experience with that.
And what was the subsidized by?
By HUD.
HUD.
And
HUD. Okay. Well, I mean, I think, many of us personally have seen how beneficial the HUD-based funding can be. Here in California, we call that qualifying for Section 8. And, you know, ultimately the individuals who are ultimately the lowest income possible, you know, are our IDD folks. And HUD programs that can help subsidize their housing to bring it within reach, particularly in a high cost of real estate state like California, are, you know, life changing. So, but Section 8 HUD funding has been more or less, at least my impression, limited or frozen forever. So I don't know if that answers your question, but, you know, we would love to advocate, I think, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, for, you know, more HUD subsidized housing for this population. It will allow more individuals to get their own place, and you know, which they can't with you know, the SSI or the SSA, you know, funding that they get under Medicaid, Medicare. So it all makes it possible. Regional center services for them are, you know, the support that they need to live in that housing, but they still have to be able to find, you know, to find and afford the housing.
Okay, great. Scott, I think this one is more directed for you. What is the basis for the thinking behind the mindset that one size fits all and all individuals with developmental disabilities belong in group homes?
You know, I wish I could tell you. Again, I just think there are some folks that believe that everybody will do better in smaller settings. And, you know, that actually may be true for maybe even 90% of folks with disabilities. But we can't forget about the 10% that need a different kind of setting. And, you know, I've talked to the advocates about, you know, why it is that they feel this way. And they just, I mean, a lot of them will cite to some older studies that were done about that really, if you look at it, measured, you know, large state institutions against, you know, smaller homes and things like that. You know, things have changed a lot since those studies were done. And I'm not sure those studies looked at necessarily the right parameters. So I honestly don't think there is data today, current data today, that suggests that, you know, small group homes are the answer for everyone. They might be the answer for most folks. But it's, you know, it's the same thing at the vocational level. People want to the advocates want to get rid of 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which allows special wages for folks with disabilities under, excuse me, under certain circumstances. And, you know, people characterize that as a civil rights issue. Everybody should get paid the minimum wage. And I get it. I understand what they're saying, but what they're basically saying from a practical standpoint is my daughter will never have a job. If that's the rule, if an employer has to pay my daughter $15 an hour, she won't get hired because she, regardless of what support she gets, she can't do $15 an hour worth of work. But she can, under a special wage, do so with appropriate supports in an appropriate setting, do a job. And she has been doing those jobs and she loves them because she feels valued. She feels like she's doing something important and she does not care what she's getting paid. It means she doesn't know a quarter from a nickel or a dollar bill from a $5 bill, but she does know doing a job. And so I want her to be able to do a job and have employment. And the only way is to allow 14C to continue for those folks. But again, the advocates say no, there's one size fits all here. Everybody must earn a minimum wage, period. And if you can't, then you don't have a job.
Well, and I'd like to also add that that there hasn't been a bias towards group homes. In fact, exactly the opposite. One of the first HCBS guidelines was group homes should be no more than 4 instead of 5 or 6, which is what they can be today. Again, not based on anything factual. And here in California, the group homes rates have been squeezed for decades, causing a significant number of homes to go out of business while the demand increases. This is certainly not, should not be interpreted as any kind of favorite status. If it seems, of course, that what's really at stake here, and I think Scott said it a couple of times, I'm going to say it again, is one size does not fit all. And there needs to be a continuum of care. And the individuals who need the highest level of care have just the same rights as those who need the least amount of care. And we need to look at it, one person at a time and always from their standpoint. And I think, generalizations are very, very risky, particularly with this population. And I know that's, it's hard at times, but we just need to stay focused on the individuals and their needs.
Dana, I asked at one point one of the advocates what he thought was the ideal home for folks with disabilities. He said, everybody should have their own home and apartment. They should live on their own. And I was thinking, boy, that is talking about segregation and isolation. I mean, there are folks that would be completely isolated if they lived in their own home by themselves and maybe with a caregiver as needed. But that's the mindset for some of them, without sort of understanding that for some folks, that's the opposite of what that person needs.
Right. Right. It's kind of, I also see this sometimes where, what's the definition of my community? Well,
that's a key issue, very key issue. Yes.
Many times they leave the "my" out of it.
Right. Right. Right.
Now, so I think this is probably given some really good kind of balance to, the perspective, a parent's perspective versus a policymaker's perspective versus, a service provider who's, trying to provide services in this, environment, which is so critical to these individuals.
Yep.
Great. We do have another question for you, Scott. What is it about the larger setting specifically that seems to work better for someone in your experience?
My daughter, just using her again as an example, just has a tremendous number of activities and options that she can choose from to fill her day in the larger setting. And so, and we're talking about social activities, we're talking about vocational activities, as well as, other services like therapeutic services, medical services. And, we have a choice. We can have her use services off the campus, and we do in some instances. But we have the opportunity to allow her to choose the services that are offered on the campus, and it really gives her a very full life. She's engaged with many, many different folks of a variety of abilities, including folks without disabilities. And she gets off the campus, quite a bit. Obviously, the pandemic has had an impact on that, unfortunately, and we're just coming now out of that a bit. But I find that the larger settings can offer a lot more, to at least to folks like my daughter, who has mobility issues and behavior issues and other issues that, make the convenience of these activities and services much better for her. The other thing I take comfort in a larger setting is there's lots of eyes watching, making sure that things are done properly, that there isn't abuse and neglect. I feel as a parent much safer for my daughter in a larger setting. Obviously at Misericordia, I haven't experienced other large settings, so I don't want to speak universally, but I had concerns about her being in a small home where there's just one staff person, or maybe two staff people, and there isn't some other folks who have their eyes on what's going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a question in the chat that came in. This is for both of you. Do either of you know of services such as Good Shepherd's Fund that helps manage a special needs trust or financial needs of those with disabilities after their family is no longer alive?
I do. I mean, there's a Shepherd of the Valley, is it? Here in California, and from time to time, I've seen families, get them involved when they wanted to continue to have guardians, looking out for their welfare of their son or daughter after they were gone. Maybe there weren't other siblings involved. And so, in that sense, a guardian to hire, so they don't do things for free or for without compensation, but they can be obviously a tremendous resource, and if you're trying to figure out how to transition the role that you take in your son and daughter as they and you age and you fade out of the picture.
Yeah, and I'll put a little plug in here for Together for Choice. We're actually going to be putting on a webinar this fall on guardianships and special needs trusts that families can establish to provide for their family member when they're no longer around. And obviously, you need to be very careful with those because if your son or daughter is currently qualifies for Medicaid funding, that there are limits to the assets that person can have access to. And so that's why these trusts need to be very carefully designed, and there are lawyers available who specialize in those things to make sure that it's structured in a way that the funds can be used for the benefit of your family member, but the family member would still qualify for Medicaid funding.
Yeah, well said, Scott.
I think we have time for one last quick question for both of you. How does advocating for individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability change their lives?
Obviously, when we advocate for them, we're advocating for the things that they need. So, for example, when we advocated for let's call it a more permissive interpretation of the settings rule, what we were doing was trying to make sure that folks that would benefit from living in an intentional community, a campus setting, a farmstead, who don't need the intensive services necessarily of an intermediate care facility, but nonetheless would like a more congregate type setting, they can get that setting that they need. And, we have, again, personally seen, as I've said, where folks who have moved from their own apartment or from a small group home to some of these larger settings have really done much, much better. They've been able to get off some of the medications they were on. They were able to lose a lot of weight. They're not only their physical health and their mental health improved, their behavior improved. So we can see that it really, this kind of advocacy really does make a difference. Absolutely.
I guess here in California, there was considerable advocacy that's gone on to get the state to change the rate structure and to, reflect regional cost differences and, incorporate, increasing costs over time. And it was a hard sell, I think, because the beneficiaries of that were actually the people who are served and the staff that's employed by service providers. But the politicians saw it as nothing more than a request for a bigger budget. And so this is an example probably where the advocacy really was or need to be communicating those stories and understanding how, the rates would ultimately lead to better services, more capacity, higher wages for people who are, struggling to stay here and stay living in high cost areas like Santa Clara County. And so I think there's a role for advocates in all levels of government. And I'm really hopeful that we're going to see some positive changes with the rates that have just been increased substantially here in California.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for all of your questions. That was the end of our Q&A session. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the evening.
Hey, Brittany, one more question for Scott. What can folks do to support Together with Choice?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we'd love to have folks join Together for Choice. We have members in all 50 states. But one of the things we often get asked when we go to Washington and talk to members of Congress and people at the agencies is, well, where are your members located? How many members do you have? And so, numbers matter, location of folks matters. And for individuals can join Together for Choice at togetherforchoice.org with no charge. We don't have a membership fee for individuals. We have a membership fee for providers, for organizations, but individuals join without a membership fee. We ask folks to contribute if they can and feel like they should. But there's no membership fee to charge. So all you got to do is go to our website, sign up, you're a member, and that really helps us in our advocacy work because there the numbers really do count.
And oh, by the way, Life Services Alternatives is a proud organizational member.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. As always, please keep in touch with LSA. You can visit our website. You can get in contact with us via email or social media. We also have our final webinar of the series with Lawrence Fung coming up on August 25th. The link to register for that will be in the chat as well. And if you're local in California, we're actually hosting our annual race, Run Home, which is coming up on September 18th, where you can run or walk in a 5K or 10K. All participants will receive a t-shirt and medal. So again, the registration link for our run will be in the chat as well. We hope to see you all at our next webinar and our race. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you all, and particular thanks to Scott for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And thanks to all the LSA staff for all the work that went into pulling this off.
Yes. Thank you both so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.